For years now, I've been drifting away from Pokémon. The last mainline game I bought was Alpha Sapphire, and the last one I really enjoyed was White. That was in 2014 and 2011, respectively. It's a sad feeling that I'm sure many people out there resonate with. Having a franchise you used to love go in a direction that doesn't interest you. It's a phenomenon not unique to Pokémon either. Personally, the same thing has happened with both the British sci-fi series Doctor Who and Star Wars to some degree. I still follow the franchise to some extent, and I've picked up a few spin-offs here and there, like Let's Go Pikachu in 2018, which I thought was actually pretty good, and Pokémon Legends Arceus in 2022, which I found extremely mediocre. Ultimately though, the thing I was most interested in to begin with, the full JRPG adventure games, have slowly lost my interest in the past decade. It's insane to think it's even been that long, but it's true. Unlike other Nintendo games, Pokémon has really struggled to modernize, thanks in part to its yearly release schedule, and it's been very evident ever since the jump to 3D. Following in the footsteps of Sonic the Hedgehog, Mega Man, and Castlevania, Pokémon, I think, has really struggled to find its identity in the third dimension, and this has caused the series developer, Game Freak, to play it extremely safe. Modern Pokémon can be, in part, defined by its lack of confidence and risk-taking, and this can be seen in everything from the game's art style to the ever-changing yet very similar set of battle gimmicks used to market each of the 3D games. To top it all off, the constant stream of releases, which for some reason seem to necessitate entirely new, unconnected stories, have left the lore and mythos of Pokémon arguably the most interesting part of the first 4 generations, in a completely fractured, nonsensical state. For years, I've struggled to put into words exactly why I think these issues have been so detrimental to the long-term interest from fans of the first few generations, myself included. But I think I've finally figured it out, or at least one explanation. Early Pokémon, perhaps more than any other game or series, absolutely thrived under its technical limitations. The atmosphere, music, and sheer simplicity let people fill out the world with their own imaginations, dreaming of what it would be like to live an adventure alongside Pokémon, or what dark secrets lay inside that the developers weren't fully letting you in on, ripe for rumors and theories spreading around schools and playgrounds. In essence, early Pokémon gave you a tiny window into a seemingly vast world, whereas modern Pokémon gives you all the windows you want and more. Binoculars, telescopes, only there's nothing to see. With all the blanks filled in, the illusion is broken. The Pokémon series has looked essentially the same since it first made the jump to 3D with Pokémon X and Y in 2013. Like I said, Game Freak played it extremely safe, opting for a flat, cel-shaded anime style, presumably to be more in line with the image everyone had of how Pokémon should look from the animated TV show. I assume the sheer blandness of this art style was initially due to the limitations of the 3DS, but it's a style they've stuck with ever since, and it really exacerbates all the other issues the games have. By all metrics, Pokémon Red and Blue were ugly. The pixel art was crude and simplified to the point of being almost unrecognizable compared to the game's promo art, and the lack of color on the original Game Boy certainly didn't do it any favors. Like many games in the 80s and 90s, the music did a ton of heavy lifting. This was slightly remedied in Gold and Silver on the Game Boy Color, but by Ruby and Sapphire on the Game Boy Advance, Game Freak had really found their footing. The Hoenn region was presented in full color with a warm pastel palette. The world map felt more lush and expansive, and battles had a few more animation frames, as well as tons of new effects to sell each attack. This was essentially the art style that carried forward onto the DS with Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, which were the first games in the series to utilize any 3D elements, with the overworld, land, and buildings being 3D models, albeit still with pixel art textures. The DS games were thick with atmosphere, featuring snowy mountains, rainy swamps, mysterious caves, and sunny beaches. In Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the atmosphere was pushed even further with tranquil autumn leaves and ancient cities with abandoned buildings. This is, in my opinion, where the Pokémon art style peaked. The pixel art is beautiful, the world feels lush and lived in, full of secrets, and the battle animations, while still very simple, are serviceable. I know this is a bit of a hot take, however, as many people would likely say the peak came in Pokémon Black and White, which were also on the DS. These games featured extensive use of 3D for objects in the overworld, like massive buildings and bridges, as well as fully animated battle poses for each Pokémon, utilizing the DS's ability to translate, squash, and stretch sprites. As for why I prefer Gen 4 over Gen 5, I just think that Black and White's art style is a tiny bit too chaotic. The battles look great, but they also look pretty different from the overworld, which itself is kind of a weird mix of low-poly 3D environments with 2D pixel art sprites. It's not bad by any means, but I just don't think it's as good and as polished as its predecessors. Then comes the dreaded jump to 3D. Like I said before, many games had a rough transition to 3D, and Pokémon held off for a long time, despite the DS actually being capable of rendering 3D games. And just to be clear, not every game needs to be 3D. In fact, I don't know if Pokémon needs to be 3D, which is something I'll come back to later. With the release of the 3DS though, I guess Game Freak felt like they should make the transition. Pixel art was out and cell shading was in, and man, it was pretty rough. The overworld of X and Y almost looks as if someone took the overworld from Black and White and simply dropped 3D characters onto it. Movement is no longer locked to the grid, but objects in the world still are, which gives this bizarre sense of contrivance to the whole game. Everything is now 3D, from tall grass to rivers and fences, but with the completely flat lighting, black outlines, and a painful amount of aliasing, the whole game just looks bad. It feels weird, empty, and lifeless, like you're running through a cardboard diorama version of Pokémon. In some ways, the battles fare a little bit better, with simple directional lighting and some decent looking backgrounds, although they're still very abstract as far as scenery goes. On the other hand, though, battles are where the limitations really stand out. Pokémon still barely move when they attack, with VFX and particle animation used instead, much like the 2D games. The idle animations are all dull and lifeless, with very little appeal being given to any of the creatures, and when I say appeal here, I mean the animation term. Finally, the close-up nature of the battles reveals the sheer lack of detail in the cel-shaded style. where Gen 5's style had almost too much texture and detail as a result of its animated pixel art. Gen 6 has none. Every Pokémon looks like it's made out of the same material, kind of soft, matte, and spongy, and things like fur or feathers are reduced to single, solid colors. Unfortunately, this is the style Game Freak chose to stick with as they continued making games in 3D. Sure, Sun and Moon pulled back the camera and offered some new perspectives, and the battles finally got real environments, but just like, look at this. It's so bland and soulless. And I wish I could say that moving off the 3DS improved things for Game Freak, but it really didn't. If anything, it's only made it more apparent that the 3DS wasn't what was holding them back. Sword and Shield still looked like 3DS games, and Scarlet and Violet, which aren't even out yet, look at best like pre-rendered cutscenes for a GameCube game. A joke I've made to my friends pretty much every time a new Pokémon game gets revealed is that Game Freak doesn't have a single environment or technical artist working for them, because the environments in these games look so fucking awful. It almost seems like it's getting worse, too. Pokémon Legends Arceus is genuinely one of the ugliest games I've ever seen from a large publisher. Not only that, but the bland, lifeless character and Pokémon animations have not changed at all since X and Y, and as the environments get more detailed, if you can call this detail, it really sticks out. You've probably seen this example of Wingull roaming around a field in Sword and Shield, just kind of hovering there, not even flapping its wings. Finally, none of this is to mention Dexit, referring to Game Freak announcing that the list of Pokémon obtainable in Sword and Shield would be reduced from the full national Pokédex, which I think is a complex problem that I don't really want to dive into in this video, though I will talk about things related to it later on. However, I will say that Game Freak claiming that this was to give them more time to work on quality animations, and then just reusing the same ones from the 3DS was pretty insane, and I think it was understandable why people were upset by that.
Gotta catch 'em all! A sneak peek at Pokémon. Pokémon, the journey's just begun. Pokémon, more the better. Pokémon, Team Rocket's on the run. Pokémon, we're friends forever. You've got...
A question I've often wondered about is why they've chosen to stick with a 3D anime style despite so clearly struggling to realize it. Like I said before, it initially makes sense on a surface level. The Pokémon TV show, which uses an anime style, was extremely popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, and this is where many people got their idea of what Pokémon was supposed to look like, what the mess of pixels on the original Game Boy screen was supposed to represent. Anime, however, is a hand-drawn 2D art style, and historically, 3D games have always struggled to really capture the anime vibe. It wasn't until the release of games like Dragon Ball FighterZ where you could really say they succeeded in making the characters, lighting, and animations look hand-drawn. It's since become a little bit more popular, seen in a few big games like Genshin Impact, but having said that, these games still don't look perfect to me. In actual anime, almost all the backgrounds are painted, giving them a beautiful, almost dreamlike quality. In Dragon Ball FighterZ, probably the most successful recreation of the anime style in 3D, the backgrounds are still pretty generic in comparison. Just basic 3D models and materials. Weirdly, one of the best examples I've seen that manages to really capture that painterly feeling of anime environments is Project Feline, a kind of Sonic the Hedgehog adjacent platformer being developed by YouTube indie dev Raymond Cripps. He uses custom shaders and depth of field effects to try and match that painted look, and I think it works really well. Pokemon's mix of anime-styled characters and semi-realistic environments has never really worked for me, and it only looks worse as the resolution increases. All of this brings me to a question. Does Pokemon even need to be 3D? And I'm not talking about practically from a development standpoint, making content creation easier for Game Freak, etc. I mean, conceptually, what has Pokemon actually gained from switching to 3D? Because I'm struggling to think of much. Legends Arceus was the first time I really felt like they were doing anything with the 3D, and that came out this year, nearly 10 years after they first made the switch. For me, the answer is pretty simple. No. Pokemon definitely doesn't need to be 3D. Especially if they plan on maintaining their increasingly absurd yearly release schedule, they simply don't have enough time to polish their environments and fill them with interesting details and secrets. Secrets in particular are something I feel has really been lost from the 2D days. Because of the limited screen space of the Game Boy and DS, secrets could really be hidden in plain sight, so to speak. If you took even a little bit of time to explore, you'd almost always be rewarded. In 3D, that just isn't possible because of, well, how 3D works. You can just see ahead of you. This is part of the reason people say that modern Pokemon games feel super linear compared to the past. Routes connecting cities feel empty, straightforward, and simplistic, and cities are really just there to facilitate Pokemon centers and gyms. Pokemon reduced to the formula. Before I move on, I just want to take a moment to look at the games that really best exemplify all these art style issues. Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. BDSP, as they're commonly referred to, were released the year before Legends Arceus as remakes of the DS classics Diamond and Pearl. Criticisms about missing platinum content, lack of endgame, or quality of life changes aside, these games are really quite interesting because they offer a direct comparison between the present and the past. The best way to put it is that these games just look uninspired. At this point, it shouldn't be surprising, but for me, these games represented a new low for Pokemon. The environments frankly look awful, and the chibi characters move in this weird, stilted way that's super unnatural. Cursed, you might say. In traditional Pokemon fashion at this point, the lighting is flat and boring, looking completely washed out in some areas and weirdly dark in others, lacking any sort of pleasing contrast or artistic composition. What really pains me about these games is, because they were made as one-to-one remakes of Diamond and Pearl, they're basically just straight downgrades. Whatever your opinion on the Game Boy Advance and DS art styles, I think most people would agree that Fire Red and Leaf Green were a massive visual upgrade over Red and Blue, and likewise for Heart Gold and Soul Silver over Gold and Silver. Here, sadly, that isn't the case. The DS games were good-looking games, and BDSP are just not. The nice pastel colors of Gen 4 have been replaced with garish, overly vibrant greens and browns. 3D models that look like they were ripped straight from TurboSquid or CG Trader, complete with the default-ass materials, and a complete disregard for the beautiful, serene atmosphere that made the Sinnoh region so special. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl look like a fan game, made by one or two people learning Unity in their free time, but no, these are two actual releases from the most profitable media franchise on the planet. It's worth noting that these games weren't made by Game Freak, they were outsourced to ILCA, a medium-sized Japanese studio of about 300 developers that seems to generally offer support on other studios' games, as well as create CG trailers. However, Pokémon is Game Freak's property, and they signed off on this release. Ugly, uninspired, with a complete lack of artistic direction or cohesion, it's frankly insulting that the Pokémon Company expects people to pay $60, which is more than the original's cost, might I add, for for these absolutely worthless remakes. And I guess now would be a great time to add, yeah, they're still doing the fucking dual release scam they've been pulling since the Game Boy. Literally no other gaming property would be able to get away with that in the modern day. The weirdest thing about all of this is that while Sword and Shield, BDSP, and Legends Arceus all look truly awful, Game Freak's first outing on the Switch, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, actually looks really good. Like, it's nothing game-changing or industry-defining, but it really looks genuinely good. Despite dropping the toon shader, the art style is, at least for the environments, much more stylized and cartoony than the recent mainline games, and the post-processing effects like light shafts and bloom look really nice. And this extends to the battle arenas, which have genuine charm. Don't get me wrong, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee still suffer from many problems present in the other modern games. Lifeless animations, routes feeling empty and linear, and this is especially bad with no random encounters, no voice acting, etc. But as far as graphics go, they're the best Game Freak has ever put out. How they manage this random jump in quality while maintaining the yearly release cadence and seemingly subsequently lost this ability is truly beyond me, but it's proof Game Freak has it in them. Ever since Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, Pokémon games have, in part, used new battling features to market the games to new and returning players. On the Game Boy Advance, this was double battles, where each player fights with two Pokémon at once. In Diamond and Pearl, this was online multiplayer, and in Black and White, it was triple battles, which were like double battles, but, you know, triple. Pokémon X and Y, though, did something a little different. The main selling point this time around was Mega Evolution, which is explained as a sort of hidden ultimate evolution able to be used by some Pokémon, changing their appearance and giving them extra power, but only once per battle. This started the trend of what I'll be calling gimmicks. In X and Y, it was Mega Evolution. In Sun and Moon, it was Regional Forms and Z moves, and in Sword and Shield, it was Dynamaxing. Right away, you'll begin to see the problem. Z moves are powerful moves that can be learned by some Pokémon and can only be used once per battle. Dynamaxing allows certain Pokémon to grow in size and become more powerful, and, you guessed it, can only be used once per battle. Hey, wait a second, you might be thinking. Aren't these basically all just the same thing but with a different name? Yes. Yes, they are. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to talk about Mega Evolution, since they were introduced first and the latter two are functionally the same, so they basically all share the same issues. I'm also coming at this from the perspective of someone who, in all honesty, doesn't care that much about battling in Pokemon games. I've never gotten into breeding, min-maxing, IV or EV training, or anything even remotely competitive. I find the exploration and world building way more compelling. I've always been the type to just spam the most powerful moves of the correct type, teach my Pokemon 0 status moves and have an HM slave, etc. I get that maybe these gimmicks make battling more interesting for people who are really into it, but that's not me. From a lore and world-building perspective, Mega Evolutions have really bothered me ever since they were introduced. It's kind of hard to pinpoint why exactly, but I think it has something to do with the fact that it takes away just a little bit from the simplicity and kind of purity of the Pokemon world. Something I heard recently in a video by Scruffy on the sound design of Pokemon Legends Arceus was that he liked that that game interpreted Pokemon as animals rather than as characters. And I think this is along those same lines. Mega Evolutions make Pokemon feel less like these cool animals that happen to have these cool powers and more like superheroes or something. Part of Pokemon's appeal, at least for me, is the realism that comes from its simplicity. It does feel a little goofy to say that out loud, but I think it's true. Something about the fact that it's just a normal world with cool animals makes it so much more engaging. It feels like a world that could actually exist, like we could one day wake up and have it be our own. It's part of the reason I never really got into things like Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh, or Bakugan. Pokemon just felt so much more grounded. Part of this groundedness, I think, came from the fact that in the early games, you were really just a normal Pokemon trainer. Sure, you're selected to fill out the Pokédex and you go on some crazy adventures, but at the end of the day, it's just you and your Pokemon against the world. And the NPCs you battle are really in the same boat as well. Rolling up on youngster Jimmy with a Mega Evolved Charizard and absolutely ass-blasting his Raticate into an alternate dimension makes it kind of hard to imagine there was any world in which that was a fair fight. With Mega Evolution, you're no longer just a Pokemon trainer. You have a special power that very few, if any, other characters in the game have. And it just feels weird. It feels wrong. And it doesn't, to me, feel like the Pokemon that I grew up with. Putting world building aside for a moment, it also just feels kind of lame to have a giant win the battle button that you can press whenever you feel like. Pokemon was already a fairly easy series, but Mega Evolution makes it feel trivial. Okay, so just a few days ago, while I was working on this video, Game Freak announced new info about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and sure enough, there's a new battle gimmick, and it is very similar to the past 3 battle gimmicks. It's called terrestrializing, the terrestrial phenomenon. It turns Pokemon into this like crystal form, which admittedly looks kind of cool. Doesn't really make much sense, but yeah, it's essentially the same thing, be used once per battle. It changes the Pokemon's type, which is a little bit different. Anyway, right here, they come out and say, this is the win battle button. Terrestrializing holds the key to victory or defeat in battles in the Paldea region. A little bit ridiculous at this point, I think. You would think that Game Freak might want to give people something different. Apparently not. This is the 4th iteration of what is essentially Mega Evolution. So anyway, back to the video. For the sake of fairness, I feel like we should briefly talk about why these gimmicks were added in the first place. One reason is pretty simple. Game Freak obviously wanted to spice up the rock, paper, scissors style combat the series had become known for, and didn't feel like double, triple, or even rotation battles, which were another feature from Gen 5, were good enough. Another reason, and this one I find much more annoying, is that it gave them an excuse to make new, cool variants of fan-favorite Pokemon like Charizard, Lucario, Metagross, and Salamence. They gotta sell more merch, damn it! At least for the former, I kind of get it. There's a certain charm to them, but overall, Pokemon battles are pretty simple, and that means they're not very interesting after a while. Bangin' music is kind of all they've got going for them. I think there's a lot that could be done to spice them up without resorting to these gimmicky new mechanics. Purely aesthetically, Pokemon battles would be a lot more interesting if the Pokemon did, anything during the battle other than just stare blankly at each other across an awkwardly small gap in an empty arena devoid of charm or life. Obviously, it would be awesome if Pokemon switched to a full action combat system like in Pokken Tournament or any other brawler-style fighting game, but I think there's also plenty of room to implement a hybrid system like the one in Final Fantasy VII Remake, which bridges the gap between turn-based and full dynamic action. These ideas are incredibly ambitious though, and remember, we're on, at most, a 2-year development cycle. They could also do what Legends Arceus did. By allowing battles to dynamically occur anywhere in the open world, the backgrounds of battles suddenly became way more interesting. Sometimes you're fighting out in a field, sometimes you're on the edge of a cliff or under a tree, next to a river, etc. It's not just the same few arenas over and over and over and over. Arceus also added agile and strong style moves, which allow you a little bit of freedom to manipulate turn order without having to rely solely on the speed stat of whatever Pokemon you're using. This is on top of a ton of other quality of life changes, like indicating before you attack how effective the move will be. These are changes that should be present in every Pokemon game moving forward, but I'm not exactly getting my hopes up. Game Freak doesn't exactly have a history of carrying new features forward. Pokemon Yellow, Pikachu, and other Pokemon can follow behind the player in the overworld, gone until Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and then gone again until Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Seasons, gone. Pokemon contests, gone. Pokeathlon, gone. Secret bases, gone. The Underground, gone. The Battle Frontier, gone. Challenging previous trainers and gym leaders with stronger Pokemon, gone. Triple battles and rotation battles, gone. Mega Evolutions, the mechanic that started this whole discussion, gone. And of course, the endgame National Pokédex, gone. Some of those things make sense as one-off features, but most of them don't. Pokemon would be in a much better state if each game built off the last, instead of each game simply being a graphical update with no gameplay improvements other than a few gimmicks, seemingly there just to market the game. A perfect example of this is the Let's Go games. Despite being obviously catered towards a more casual audience to capitalize on the success of Pokemon Go, playing through Let's Go Pikachu in 2018 was the most fun I'd had with Pokemon in years. The main attraction? No more random encounters. Pokemon appear on the overworld, and you're free to just run right past. Sure, sometimes they'll spawn right in front of you and be essentially unavoidable, but 1, it still makes you feel more in control, and 2, the new encounter format didn't suffer from the same glacial pace as your average wild Zubat fight, having to sit through all the flavor text, you got away safely, etc. So getting caught off guard every once in a while didn't feel nearly as bad. But then, Sword and Shield roll around and, hey, wait a second, there's random encounters! I wish this weren't the case, but it's obvious Game Freak feels like they're forced to choose between carrying features over from past games and adding new features due to their time constraints, and naturally, they pick the new features because that's what sells the game. For this, I really have no solution other than just stop releasing a game every year. Just stop it, please. Just stop. Pokemon has never really been a series you remember for telling outstanding or life-changing stories. Since the very first games, the narratives have consisted of little more than beat the gyms, fill out the Pokédex, and take down some bad guys along the way. By the way, this is your rival, fuck you. Say what you will, but like a lot of other Nintendo games, this simple approach proved incredibly effective. You're not caught up in your character's backstory, their relationships, the intricacies of the world, or even the details of the town you start in, because your character is just you. At the beginning of every game, the professor asks for your name and welcomes you into the world of Pokemon. And if you're like me, this creates an incredibly intimate bond between you and the game. You feel like this is your journey with your Pokemon, and the world of the game generally supports this. Pokemon games, even the ones with lots of doubling back and interweaving paths, have always been fairly linear, but when you're playing through for the first time, the games feel endless in their possibility. It really feels like you're just stumbling your way around of your own accord, and every so often you happen to find something interesting that progresses the story in some way, be it a gym battle or an encounter with Team Rocket. It's almost like a Metroidvania in that it doesn't really feel like the games are forcing you to go in any particular direction while still leading you along a set path using areas gated off by obtainable items, HMs in the case of Pokémon. Yes, they can be a little hand-holdy toward the beginning, but once you get further in, they really open up. This began to change with the release of Black and White in 2011, where the world map was simply one big loop, but for all the games released before that, this was the case. Hell, in Gen 2 and its remakes on the DS, when you beat the game, the entire region from the first games opens up for you to go and explore, as well as Mount Silver, a tough endgame zone with a final boss battle versus Red, the player character from Red and Blue. Happening upon this climactic fight at the end of my Soul Silver playthrough is one of my favorite Pokémon memories ever, and it wouldn't have been the same had I been told by the game where to go or what I would find. Sadly, this doesn't feel like something Game Freak would ever do these days. Another aspect of the early games I think often goes overlooked is the tone. With the original Game Boy games in particular, Pokémon had a pretty serious tone with a kind of dark and creepy atmosphere in many parts of the game. Lavender Town is the most obvious example of this, but many things like the art for Team Rocket grunts or Lieutenant Surge have these same dark undertones. I mean, the grunts are literally holding whips. All of this serves to create an illusion of almost imminent danger, as if something actually bad might happen if you're not careful. It feels like how a kid would feel if they were actually out exploring the world on their own, and that makes sense. Pokémon was created based on that exact experience. In Red, Blue, Gold, and Silver, the main villain is, importantly, just a guy. Giovanni is a bad guy who runs an evil organization, sure, but it's an organization you could imagine existing in the real world. It's a relatable experience to be out and about, minding your own business when someone creepy and clearly looking for trouble approaches you. And this is extra terrifying as a kid. But because every conflict in this world is decided over Pokémon battles, you now have the tools to fight back. As the stakes of the story grew in Gen 3 and 4, Game Freak leaned a little more into the absurdity, but not too much. Sure, Archie, Maxie, and Cyrus all have more eccentric appearances, but at the end of the day, they all sell the same idea. They're just normal guys trying to take advantage of you and your Pokémon. It's a really effective trope and does a huge amount of work in selling the fantasy of this world. Pokémon Black and White is where I'd started to take real issue with the story. There's Team Plasma and this guy, N, and they want to liberate Pokémon from people, which I think is actually a really compelling idea, but then you get further into the game and there's this secret society of sages and magistrates and shit, and they're trying to use N to access the legendary Pokémon and grow their power, and it's just too much. The story is no longer about you, the player, and so even in just a small way, the fantasy is not as strong. In Red and Blue, you uncover the secrets of Team Rocket, their secret hideouts, their goals, their leader, and you put a stop to them. You drive the plot forward. In Black and White, it feels as though you experience the story through sheer happenstance. Your presence is not instrumental to the narrative. You kind of just stand around while characters talk and things happen. You view events unfold, but you're not the one doing the unfolding. The characterization in Black and White is way stronger than anything Pokémon previously had to offer. The game opens like a real RPG with character backstories, relationship dynamics, and a lot of dialogue. In some ways, it was a massive step forward for Pokémon. It almost makes you want to slow down and listen to what the characters are actually saying. But partially due to the writing itself and partially due to the sheer volume of it, it becomes more of a reminder of why Pokemon did things the way it did for so long. Your journey as a trainer often takes the back seat, and that's my main gripe. I'd love to see Game Freak try something like it again and hopefully get that balance a little bit better. I also think that even with the same balance as Black and White, these issues would completely vanish if the story were experienced through actual voice acting rather than text boxes, something modern Pokemon somehow still hasn't moved on from. Let's talk about actual plot details for a moment. Every Pokemon game released after Red and Blue has centered around the cool new legendary Pokemon featured on the game's box art and in the marketing material, the so-called box legendaries. These legendaries, along with the now traditional legendary trios from each game, made up the lore of the Pokemon world, its creation myth and pantheon of deities. The legendary birds, Moltres, Zapdos, Articuno, Lugia, and Ho-Oh, control the weather and the skies. Kyogre and Groudon created the earth and seas. Dialga and Palkia rule over time and space, and finally, Arceus created the universe itself, as Pokemon's interpretation of some kind of almighty god. Pokemon's plots up until Gen 4 all revolved around someone or something attempting to upset the balance of these mythical beings, or harness their power for some evil plan. And for the most part, it works. You get the sense throughout your adventures that you're uncovering real history and myth, that there are actual stakes should the villains succeed in their plans. It's a logically consistent, perfectly simple mythos, and that begs the question, where do you go from there? If you were to ask me what Reshiram and Zekrom, the box legendaries for Pokemon Black and White, represent, I'd have a hard time giving you a straight answer. Even though I've played the games, my best guess, without looking it up, is Light and Dark, which, okay, are fairly reasonable things for deities to represent, albeit a little abstract if you ask me. But after a quick search through Bulbapedia, I was unable to find what exactly these two represent, which, on the one hand, is fine. Not every Pokemon needs to relate directly to the larger mythos laid out in the first 4 generations. But that then begs the question, what makes these legendary Pokemon? In fact, what even is a legendary Pokemon? What separates them from so-called mythical Pokemon, which, as far as I understand, are special rare Pokemon like Darkrai, Celebi, Shaymin, etc., that are explicitly not legendary Pokemon for some reason? Clearly, it has nothing to do with the pantheon and creation myth, since Reshiram, Zekrom, and all the new legendaries aren't very related. So what is it? And there it is, the problem. By asking these questions, you come to realize something important. Something that kind of breaks the entire mythos. It's all arbitrary. It doesn't matter. Game Freak is just making it up as they go along, which is, fine. I'm not gonna lose sleep over it, but it does make it far less special. If there's no internal logic, if a constant stream of new legendaries are introduced simply to sell more games, then why should people care? Tornadus, Thundurus, Landorus, and Enamorus are 4 legendaries introduced in Black and White, representing storms, earthquakes, and the forces of Hey, wait a second. Isn't that what the legendary birds, Groudon and Kyogre, already represent? Yes, it's all arbitrary. Nothing matters, these are just characters in a video game. Imagine if the ancient Greeks just kept adding to their pantheon, instead of telling multiple stories about the same gods. Imagine how much more shallow, convoluted, and nonsensical the mythology would be. This is how the modern Pokemon mythos feels, and It's sad because they had something truly great for a while, where a real, fleshed out world provided the backbone for a grounded, meaningful adventure with you and your Pokémon. With an arbitrary mythos, the entire world of Pokémon takes on a much less serious tone. It's almost satirical, like a parody of the early games. With increasingly bizarre gimmicks like Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing, lifeless animations, weirdly happy and upbeat characters, and empty, soulless environments, it's really just impossible to convince me that this world is supposed to be taken seriously at this point. Like, you're telling me that Dialga and Palkia, the creators of time and space, are supposed to exist in the same universe with Gigantamax Pikachu, which is just a normal Pikachu but really big? It's just fucking goofy. There's no other way to put it. And look, I get it. Pokémon is just a silly kids game. It is definitively, at this point, not for me. The lore doesn't matter, it's all made up, and kids are too stupid to care anyway, right? Putting any criticism of that mindset aside, it doesn't have to be this way, and it wasn't in the past. That's what's so upsetting. So what could Game Freak do? Well, I think there's a fairly simple solution. They could, like the ancient Greeks, like the Romans or Nordic tribes, just tell new stories with the same cast of characters, or in this case, Pokémon. Reuse them. Just reuse them. I mean, we already know Game Freak loves reusing old assets, so it really does make sense. People get more of their favorite legendary Pokémon, and Pokémon gets a simplified mythos to tell more believable and engaging stories with. It's a win-win. Speaking of reusing Pokémon, it's no secret that as Pokémon games have continued to release, with more and more creatures thrown at the wall to see what sticks, Game Freak has had some trouble, both with maintaining their current cast of what I think is over 1,000 Pokémon at this point, as well as designing new ones that are visually appealing and fit in with the rest. Let's touch first on the latter. With every new generation of Pokémon released, there have always been a few stinkers, or even just some clearly uninspired designs. This became especially evident in Gen 5, as Black and White were the first time since Red and Blue that Game Freak created an entirely fresh Pokédex of creatures without reusing any from past games. Standouts like Trubbish, Chandelure, and Vanillish have been criticized for clearly just being real-world objects with faces on them, and a lot of others like Clink, Palpitoad, or Leopard for being obvious rehashes of older mons. Having said that though, there are definitely some bangers. Roggenrola, Sigilif, Electros, Haxorus. I just want to be clear that this isn't me saying new Pokémon bad. What it shows though is that Game Freak doesn't have it in them to create tons of new compelling Pokémon every year without relying on crutches like using real-world objects or copying old designs. And I don't think it would be reasonable to expect that they should. Game Freak should just, and hear me out, reuse old Pokémon. Mix it up. Sprinkle in some picks from every generation. The Dexit controversy showed that there is simply no way to please everyone, especially not the people demanding that every Pokémon be obtainable in every game. It just makes sense from a world-building perspective too. Like, if I go to a different country in real life, it would be reasonable to expect that some common animals from here in the US would be present there, like mice, rats, squirrels, maybe a couple bird species, etc. There are very few, if any, places on Earth that have zero overlap in terms of fauna with other regions. Of course, this is assuming, like I mentioned earlier, that you interpret Pokémon as animals, rather than as characters, and it's not really clear where Game Freak stand on this. They seem to want it both ways. Let's look at a Pokémon like Incineroar. This is not an animal. It's just not. This is a character. Incineroar looks like a guy in a suit, which has led to the term furry bait being thrown around in the Pokemon community. And let's be honest, it's pretty accurate. It looks like a guy in a fursuit. And it's not just Incineroar either. This type of furry bait, or what I'll call more simply personality-based design, has become more and more common in modern Pokemon. Incineroar is a final evolution of one of the starters from Pokemon Sun and Moon. Looking at the other starters from that game, they all share this issue. Decidueye. This is not an animal, this is a character. Primarina. Character. These are not believable creatures you would expect to find just roaming around in the wilderness alongside Pidgey and Caterpie, and it's clear they aren't meant to be. These Pokemon clearly have innate personalities baked into their designs, whereas most Pokemon are either, like I said, just animals, or are abstract enough that even reading a personality onto them at all is a bit of a stretch. If everyone's Pokemon have identical personalities, then what's the point? What makes an Incineroar your Incineroar if they all have a confident, aggressive look on their face, all wear a flame belt, and all look like the same guy in the same fursuit? This type of design has always been somewhat present in Pokemon. Blaziken, Gardevoir, and Lucario immediately come to mind. Starting with the popularity of Greninja in X and Y though, it seems to have become a series staple, seeking desperately to recapture Greninja's success. In general, I think it's fine, good even, that there's such a range in the type of Pokemon present in the games, from the most abstract, it's a rock with a face, to more humanoid beings. But I think the line needs to be drawn somewhere, and wherever it's drawn now is clearly not working. If you can tell, like, really tell a Pokemon's personality just from seeing a picture of it, I think that's too much. For me, Pokemon are animals. Some of them are tiny, some are huge, and some are literal gods, but at the end of the day, they are distinctly different from humans. There is a thin barrier between the human world and the wild Pokemon world that I think needs to be upheld for the fantasy to work. I don't really want to get into the whole "are Pokemon enslaved?" discussion, because while I think it's interesting, it's not really the point of this video. But when you look at a Pokemon like Incineroar, who looks like it could straight up sit down, talk, and have a drink, it just doesn't feel right. Something I've wondered is whether a game like Pokémon can even work in the modern day. So much of the magic of the first 4 or 5 generations was based on its technical limitations, its confinement to handheld systems, to limited play sessions and schoolyard rumors. The games truly felt bigger than you, and in the age of the internet, where you can look up any part of the game you want, or worse, have it spoiled simply because an algorithm serves you an unwanted tweet or video, I wasn't sure it was possible. When I played Breath of the Wild in 2019, it of course got me hopeful that if one Nintendo property could redefine itself in such an elegant and innovative way, maybe Pokémon could too. Breath of the Wild was inspired, funnily enough, by the original 2D Zelda, in which you were dropped into an open world with no direction and left to your own devices to explore however you saw fit. Sound familiar? Alas, Pokémon Sword and Shield were announced, and it looked to be more of the same. Then came Legends Arceus, clearly taking inspiration from Breath of the Wild, promising a break from the tried and true formula in favor of something new. And sure, it tries a few interesting new things, but it's also so different from past games that it doesn't really do much for me. It feels more like a low-effort, Pokemon-themed Breath of the Wild clone than an actual Pokemon game. And thus, I drifted away once again, reassured that it wasn't just me. The magic of Pokemon doesn't work anymore. Recently, though, I played a little indie game called TUNIC. Wouldn't you know, TUNIC was inspired by classic 2D Zelda games of the 8 and 16-bit era, and while its core ideas are much simpler than Pokémon, it proved to me that it's still possible to capture that magic in a modern game. TUNIC has 3D graphics, but it is, in essence, still a 2D game. Sound familiar? Utilizing a static camera angle, TUNIC is able to hide an insane amount of secrets around its relatively small and simple map. You're dropped in with no direction. Well, actually, some direction, but importantly, you can't understand all of it. Throughout the game, you find pages of the game's manual, a digital version of the type of pamphlet that would come packaged with old adventure games. The manual essentially tells you how to beat the game. However, there's a twist. Most of the manual, along with the vast majority of text in the game, is written in this cryptic glyph language that you, the player, have no way of understanding, and you never will. At first, this sounds insane. Why would a game communicate in a way that's literally impossible to understand? But I want you to take a look at this interview TUNIC's lead developer did with Danny O'Dwyer from Noclip, because, as it turns out, this feature is actually genius.
And that's my very favorite sort of game, is one where as you play, you don't just find new things in your path, but suddenly the entire path that you've traveled becomes littered with question marks. You know, how many more dimensions of exploration have I not yet discovered, even in the things that I've already seen? One of the things that we want to accomplish with this game is to make people feel like they're a stranger in a strange land, like they're not meant to be here. Part of the way that we accomplish that is with this strange language. You know, it's not meant for you. Even the signs, even the UI, you know, have a little bit of mystery in them. Some people have said, oh, this makes me feel like how I felt when I, imported a game for the first time. Although I didn't have those experiences, I also played video games as a child and did not understand what morph ball meant. The feeling that somebody is earnestly trying to communicate with me and I just do not know. It's not like someone's keeping something from you. It's just that they haven't, this isn't made for you. And that's cool.
I encourage you to watch the full interview if you're interested. You can find it in the top right corner and in the description. Anyway, hearing that was a real aha moment for me because he put into words exactly how it feels to play adventure games as a kid. And crucially, he and his team figured out a way to convert that amorphous feeling into a real feature in an actual game. If a tiny indie team can do it, the most profitable media franchise on the planet can too. Obviously, Pokémon is very different from both Zelda and TUNIC, but that idea of true mystery, of feeling like the world of the game stretches beyond your understanding, is not tied to a single game. Pokémon has a lot of issues, and there's no band-aid solution that would suddenly make Pokémon into its former self, because, as I've been saying, some of that former self is the time period in which those early games released. Pre-internet, pre-social media, before online hype and rabid fan communities dedicated to rumors, leaks, theories, and drama. It's a moment lost to time. We can never return, and I don't think Pokémon can either. I do think, though, that Pokémon can become something more. A world of mystery and adventure with limitless possibility. Stories based on companionship and compassion. It's kind of what we need. There's no way to know for sure what the Pokémon Company has planned for the franchise, but the last 10 years haven't been a great indication. As for what the series needs, whether it's as simple as ending the yearly releases or as drastic as handing off to a new developer, it's incredibly hard to say. I don't know if Pokémon will ever regain its glory. Its problems are immense and multifaceted, and no solution would be perfect, much less satisfy an already divided fanbase. What I do know, though, is that I miss Pokémon, and I hope it someday returns. Thanks for watching.